Welcome to Cornell Keynotes. I'm Brad Bell. I'm the William J. Conedy Professor of Strategic Human Resources in the ILR School at Cornell University. And I also serve as our Director of our Center for Advanced Human Resource Studies, or CAHRS as we call it. Very excited to be joined today by my colleagues Chris Collins and Kevin Cox for the second keynote in our 5-part series on the CAHRS World-Class HR Business Partner Framework. In today's keynote, we will examine the foundational capabilities that enable HR business partners to drive business results. Specifically, we'll examine the importance of understanding and influencing business strategy, while also being able to anticipate and incorporate external trends. In addition, we'll look at how the HR business partner needs to partner or collaborate with centers of excellence and shared service centers to ensure their units are well positioned for success. We hope to have a few minutes at the end of today's session for Q&A, so please feel free to submit your questions at any time as we go throughout today's program. Before diving in, I'd like to introduce our two guests. Here in the studio, I'm joined by my colleague Chris Collins, who is a professor of Human Resource Studies in ILR School at Cornell. Chris preceded me as Director of CAHRS and is currently serving as the Director of ILR's Master's in Industrial Relations graduate program. Chris is an expert in strategic HR and has done a lot of work with HRBPs over the years, specifically focusing on today's topic of HR and business strategy. And joining us remotely is Kevin Cox, who is the founder and president of LKC Advisory and is currently serving as a CAHRS Executive Fellow. Kevin retired last year as General Electric's CHRO and previously served as CHRO of American Express and Pepsi Bottling. Just last week, Kevin announced that he'll be joining the board of directors of Kraft Heinz, so congratulations, Kevin.
Thanks, Brad.
So again, today we're going to be focusing primarily on kind of business strategy and the role of HR business partners in terms of driving business results. And as we did in our first keynote, we'd like to feature some video of some of our CHROs that sit on the CAHRS advisory board. These are all really highly respected HR leaders who span multiple industries, including tech, consumer products, and manufacturing. And what we ask them is really what they hear from senior leaders across their organizations in terms of what those leaders really expect and look for from their best HRBPs. So let's go to the video to hear what they had to say.
The thing that keeps coming up with when I talk to the members of the executive team, they love their HR business partners, and one of the things they call out is they love the thought leadership, and they wanted to see more and more of it. The partnership with them where they debate, where they're pushing back on leaders on their strategy or how they're thinking about the way they lead, and not just kind of execution and delivering on all the things of the framework. The cherry on top of all that is the thought leadership and the partnership. And I think especially in an environment that's going to be changing, where AI is going to be top of mind. One thing that AI can't do is AI doesn't know an organization. AI doesn't know the personalities on a team. They don't know what the strengths and the opportunities for development are on the team. They don't know the culture that they're trying to drive. And so as much as AI can do, AI doesn't have its hand on the pulse of an organization like an HR business partner does. And so that thought leadership and making sure that all the pieces around culture and leadership stay top of mind, even as we move into a world that's so dominated by technology.
First is a consistent theme from years ago, which is just being better business partners. So having a higher level of business acumen. The challenges which businesses are facing are not the same year after year. And we can't show up with a standard checklist of process and things to do or annual calendars. We need to adapt to the needs of the business and be responsive to people and organization needs. That only comes with business closeness and an ability to understand the needs of the business. So business acumen is a trend or a need, the first need.
So I think leaders, they expect their business partners to absolutely speak the language of the business, right? To understand the company's financial goals, the market trends, what's happening competitively, what's happening operationally. They really want true business partners.
First, it really is a role that's embedded in the business. So you're on a business team, whether you're at a plant level, a business unit level, C-suite level. And so you want to bring to that group your deep HR expertise. And I strongly encourage all HR business partners to continue to be investing in that, but also learning the business so you can kind of bring those two things together, understand where are the greatest value drivers for the business problems that are ahead of you in the plan year or whatever time horizon you operate on, and then bring the talent solutions to bear that really help with that value creation. And so I view the business HR partner role as really a gateway of bringing the function into the business and bringing business solutions and HR solutions together to add the greatest value. And I also think they're looking for their HR partner to help garner resources from the center and from other parts of the company that can help solution and bring outcomes to their business. So I think those are some of the main things I hear from the business leaders I speak with.
So with that introduction, we'd like to now dive into the framework. We'll bring that up on the screen and start to walk through some of the different pieces. And Kevin, I'm going to start with you today, which is, at the top of the framework, we have this kind of drive business results. And I think what we heard clearly come through those videos from the CHROs is really that is the key responsibility of the HR business partner. That's really what their leaders are expecting them to do. And I know being a very business-driven HR executive was a big part of your personal brand while you were in this seat. So can you talk a little bit about why did you prioritize that? Why did you see that as an important and critical part of your role and the role of the HRBP?
This goes back a long way, Brad, like down to my core, and I really appreciate the way you framed that up. We are talking about the roof of the framework of the model right now. This drive business results. I think probably for me, it started in graduate school, believe it or not. I went to a program that had a heavy labor and industrial relations component to it. And we spent a lot of time costing out labor contracts, particularly for the automotive companies, what was called the big three at the time, Ford, GM, and Chrysler back then. And we were expected, if we wanted to get a good grade, we were expected to understand, how do you calculate the cost of a shift premium? How do you calculate the cost of, providing safety equipment for the workforce, personal leave, that sort of thing. I mean, I remember getting down to like three places to the right of the decimal level in some of that work. And it stuck with me. It really made an impression on me. I thought I was learning about labor contract negotiation, and what I was really learning about was sort of the language of the business, as the other CHROs said in the video. And sadly, I think as labor unions in this country declined over the past 30 years, some of that discipline and some of that understanding the business impact declined with it. And I realize that not everybody comes out of that background, but I still believe we have a really strong responsibility to learn it. Another story, this is a Pepsi story. Pepsi was a place, as maybe some of you know, that back then was not afraid to let you know what it thought about your performance. And I will never forget a production manager at Pepsi. We were out talking in the warehouse, and he looked around at the cases of product that were stacked out there. He said, "Hey, Cox," he said, "you know what you need to remember about HR?" He said, "You're a tax on my business. You see all this Pepsi?" He said, "There's 2 cents of a tax I have to pay for HR and the services." And he goes, "Nobody likes to pay a tax, especially me." And he goes, "So if we're going to pay it, you better really, really be worth it." And again, that's a 30-year-old story, but it was a pretty valuable lesson to a young guy at the time about how the P&L really thought about what we did. That's kind of hard, right? To kind of hear yourself called a tax on the business. So this idea of how you add value was another theme there. And the last sort of memory I have, I'm going to go over to American Express several years later, and I was coming into it from Pepsi, whole different industry, whole different company, financial services. And I was introduced to the head of the private bank at American Express at that time, right out of central casting, impeccably dressed, hair was perfect, handsome guy, beautifully tailored suit. And I shook his hand and I said, "Well, tell me a little bit about your business." And he kind of sniffed the air and he goes, "I wouldn't even know where to begin with you," which was the insult that you think it was. And I looked at him and I said, well, why don't you tell me how you make money? And instantly his entire attitude changed. And he said, well, we have 3 lines of business. And on the asset management side, we look at fees, and we're having some difficulty with the competitive. And we just kind of found this common ground on how do you make money? How does your P&L work? You know, what are you really in business to do? So if you kind of take my building blocks, kind of a labor foundation at the very basics, maybe thinking about this more as I've got something to prove in terms of value to the business, and I need to work really hard to assert that value. And then sort of understanding how do you think about a business through the eyes of a general manager, and eventually maybe a CEO, and eventually maybe a board of directors. That's kind of my journey, Brad. It's a long one, but that's 30 something years in the making.
Those are all great stories, Kevin. One thing that struck me also in the videos was not just the important role that HR business partners play in helping to drive those business results, but also I think as Christy Pambianchi highlighted it, in the sense of they're often not doing it alone, in the sense of they are that bridge to the rest of the HR function. They're having to partner with the centers of excellence or corporate functions, really kind of pulling in those resources. And I think that's something that you, Chris, and I heard a lot as we were developing this framework, in terms of HR business partners having to walk this delicate balance between serving their business unit, but also kind of serving the broader HR function, and getting what their business unit wants and needs, but also making sure they're helping to roll out corporate-wide priorities. So, in your view, and having seen this for many years, what does that partnership look like when it's done the best? In terms of HR business partners really working with those CoEs.
Well, now I think we're sort of maybe to the blue layer of the model, that the second from the bottom. I call it, I mean, I love every single box on this framework, I really do. But what I'd call this tension layer, the blue layer there, is probably one of my favorites. I've got a special fondness for it. And the best HRBPs that I ever worked with made this blue layer look easy. And it is far from easy, as you kind of said in your question, Brad. I look at HRBPs as trauma doctors, like in a hospital or an emergency room, working on adrenaline, not sleeping a lot. No 2 days are the same. On Tuesday, you deliver a baby. On Wednesday, you might be treating a car accident victim. And that's part of the attraction of the job. That's part of what I love the most about it, is the variety and honestly the adrenaline, and being really close to the business, as I think Christy said. But those trauma doctors need a really special relationship with the other resources in the hospital. They need surgeons for when they've maybe patched up somebody, but they really need expert surgery. They need orthopedics, they need labs, they need radiology, whatever you want to think about. That trauma doctor's got a really special relationship with those centers of expertise in a hospital. I think our greater HRBPs need to have, or they do have, that same relationship with their CoEs in talent acquisition, or in total rewards, or any other area that's a CoE. So knowing when to call in a CoE, kind of knowing when to leverage them versus trying to reinvent the wheel yourself, or fake it till you make it. Maybe we've all been there. I'm certainly guilty of some of that. That's a really important skill, I think, for an HRBP at the world-class level to have. And kind of as you're getting to in your question, Brad, the best HRBPs also try to find a way to influence those CoEs. Back to my doctor analogy, they may say we need a better way at this hospital to treat strokes or heart attacks or something like that. We're losing people. And so they can work with those centers of expertise to come up with a protocol that is world-class and results in better impact to those that they're trying to treat. For example, in HR, we need a better answer to workforce planning in the age of AI. That's something that everybody I know about is struggling with. We need a better answer. That's our version of strokes or heart attacks or something pretty consequential. So we have to think about that. That's how you get the system to work together efficiently. I don't believe the CoEs can do it themselves. I don't think the HRBPs can do it themselves. But if you really get those groups working in harmony, you can create something really, really special. And the best HRBPs I had, as I said, they make that look really, really easy. developmentally. That's why I love people who path through HRBP roles. I love it when they can be as effective at the HRBP level as they can be in a COE, because you really learn different skills and sort of a respect for how the system really ought to operate. At least that's how I think about it. Brad?
Yeah, great. So maybe Kevin, before I go over here to Chris for the next part of the framework, really interesting question came in from Emily. I think springboarding off of some of your earlier experiences that you shared. Says, how do you balance the need of having the HRBP really be close to the business and the business leaders? When you have leaders who may have a sensitivity to having HR in the room, maybe their fear of being judged, maybe don't trust the HR business partner. I mean, how do kind of HRBPs break down those issues?
Well, Emily, I'm going to tell you another story. I've got a million of them. When I first got my real field job at Pepsi in New Jersey, which for Pepsi was a really tough place, didn't make a lot of money, had a tough cost of labor, cost to serve, had tough, demanding customers, pretty challenging competitors. My first day on the job, I met the general manager. His name is Anthony. And he said, basically, hey, new guy, he said, we've been really struggling with corporate's automotive or car policy. And we've tried a couple times, haven't been successful, but it's really important to this business. We've got a lot of roads and highways. We don't take airplane trips in New Jersey. We spend a lot of time in traffic, and we're not being reimbursed for that for our personal vehicle use, et cetera. Go fix that. And I said, okay, I'll see what I can do. And about 20 minutes later, he knocks on my door and he goes, hey, you're never going to succeed. He goes, we've tried many times. And he said, you don't have a prayer. They've got their reasons. They're not going to change. But the fact that you were willing to kind of take that issue up gives me some sense that you really want to be a part of this team. And that's the kind of HR partner that we're looking for. So maybe that was a test, or maybe he didn't know it was a test when he gave it to me. But I think I passed that hazing process that we all go through. So my true north was always to believe I am here in this unit, in this geography, with this function. I am here to help them be more successful. That's why the company put me here. And I tried everything I did to really be governed by that principle. And there were times when I got into it a little bit with headquarters because they thought I was maybe being a little bit too rogue or too sensitive to what my business needed and not enough to their bigger picture. And there were times that I got into it with my local team because they needed to see a light that maybe wasn't so easy for them to see where they were. That's the whole essence of that blue layer. That's what makes the job hard. It's kind of why I love this tension layer so much, but it's navigable. I mean, you can find a way through this if you're true to your principles. If you're just selling out and doing things because somebody told you to do them, I think people see right through that, and I would not advise that particular approach. Brad, Emily, I hope that's responsive.
Yeah, that's great, Kevin. Great example that kind of ties it all together. So Chris, I want to come over to you to kind of talk about the bottom layer of the framework, those kind of black boxes. Those really focus on, two key pieces. One is, understanding, influencing, operationalizing business strategy. Another one is around anticipating and incorporating external trends into strategies. So can you talk just a little bit about, what do these entail and what do they look like when they're really done, well?
Yeah, it's a great question. So my take on this model is, I think the two hardest boxes for most people to develop are the bottom two. And I think that's partly the nature of the function of HR is most people that are in these HRBP roles came up through roles where they're rewarded, valued for doing HR stuff, for putting the right practice in place, for making sure it's working successfully every day, whether that's around payroll or staffing. You get really good at doing HR process. And often that comes at the expense of really not knowing what the business is doing. And it's one of the things we consistently heard when we talked with senior line leaders is they really want someone in place who, first and foremost, is their partner thinking about the business? How are we going to be successful? How are we taking care of our customers? And we see this all the time when we do training at the executive level with HR business partners, is often they're really great at HR. You ask them about strategy, and often the strategy they come back with is an HR strategy, because that's the comfort zone. And what we really want to see is having a voice on where is the business headed? Do I know who our customers are? Do I deeply understand what their needs are? How we meet those needs differently from our competition? And so that understand, influence, organizational business strategy and operationalize business strategy, super important to then think about, if you are that ER doctor, how do I prioritize what work we're going to work on this year? What are the key underlying people issues that are going to help make this business successful? If you don't know what the business is trying to do, all that other stuff we do in HR, not useful. So really building that muscle, super, super critical. Kevin mentioned this as well as one of his examples, is like, but things are changing rapidly. So even though this is how we're succeeding with our customers today, as we see more technology, new competitors, new markets we're trying to enter in, we got to be able to anticipate what's changing and how that's going to influence how we're going to be successful, how we might compete, who we're going to try and sell to, the modes of selling. And so being good at static, what we're doing today, great start, but then anticipating what's happening in the future. And I think HR people have some pretty unique perspectives on that changing market, because we see this in new technologies coming into the function. We see this in terms of new demands from our youngest employees and newer generations in the workplace. I think we've got deep insights into market conditions and how they're changing, that bringing those back and saying, hey, instead of just thinking about that solely through HR, how can I introduce that to the team in terms of, here's what we're seeing in terms of our youngest employees and what they're demanding, how they like to work. What might that mean for business opportunities? Just adds new value to the team and helps the rest of the team maybe level up in thinking about outside in, how we might be competing.
Yeah. I mean, what I heard a lot in what you're saying, it seems to line up with what Jennifer Christie was saying about leaders really wanting that thought partner. It's not just a thought partner on the HR issues, it's thought partner on all the issues that are impacting their business, whether it's human capital, economic, other, technology trends, et cetera. Yeah.
I mean, you've got limited people on your senior team. Mm-hmm. You can't have people that don't contribute to the bigger conversation. So the first and foremost, I think they want that thought leader, but a thought leader on the business, and then maybe through the unique lens of your human capital or HR.
Yeah. So you started out by saying, this bottom layer is maybe one of the hardest ones to develop. And I imagine we have a lot of either current HRBPs joining us today, or maybe those that are aspiring to be in the role someday. So I want to come to you, and then I'll come to you, Kevin, in terms of, as we kind of look at what we've talked about today, what are some ideas you have for how HRBPs, or those that want to get in the role, can start to build that muscle, whether it's around business strategy or how to partner with other parts of the organization?
Yeah. So no simple answer, and Kevin will have his own interpretation of this. I know. I think part of it is just having some frameworks to rely on. So I don't think anyone knows everything about strategy or business operations. But if you've got a framework to go and ask those questions, and so to me, it's mostly about curiosity, but having some path that can guide you to have that curiosity, so you're not just asking random questions. But if you've got a framework of strategy or a framework of how we create value for customers, being able to use that, to leverage that, to ask questions of your general manager, to ask that of your chief financial officer for your business, or whoever's leading operations, or whoever might be leading logistics and supply chain. Like, if you can have that framework to ask those questions, you can then gather all that knowledge. And that's what I think makes great HRBPs so incredible and so flexible in terms of who they work for and what businesses they support, is if you have those frameworks, you can ask any question. So, we try and embed those frameworks in courses we've created for Cornell and courses we've created for on-campus programs for undergrads and masters, for executive programs. Is just giving them frameworks. And if you expose them to 4 or 5, maybe there's 2 that really stick, that become their go-to, but it's the way to start those conversations.
Great. How about you, Kevin, in terms of, how can those individuals that are interested or maybe in the role can continue to develop some of these skills around business acumen, partnership, external sensing of trends?
I want to just amplify one of Chris's great points. Though primarily, I think he was talking about the need for frameworks, which I completely agree with. Chris, I love what you said about questions, not really answers. I think sometimes HR people don't have all the confidence in the world that they think somehow that their job is to know the answer. And what an HRBP has in common with the best board of directors that I've ever worked around, board of directors often don't have the answer either. They ask great questions. And not as a game, but just sort of as a mirror to kind of hold that back and say, well, if this happened, how would we respond to something like this? And you've got such, you HR professionals, you've got such a vantage point because you see the organization not working exactly as it was designed. You see the sort of the soft underbelly of it. So you've got a great basis from which to ask these questions. And I would encourage you not to be too intimidated by that and find your confidence in the question, as Chris said, not really the answer. Brad, this morning, thinking about this, I posted on my LinkedIn site this 10-minute video. I think I'd call it an appetizer from Roger Martin. Roger's one of my favorite strategy thinkers and writers. I follow his blog, but this was it was a YouTube 10-minute short. I posted it on my site, so if one's interested, you can go there. He wrote, along with A.G. Lafley, who was a pretty well-regarded CEO of Procter & Gamble at the time, he wrote the book Playing to Win. So to me, if you watch the 10-minute video, you probably will already be ahead of the pack in terms of how to think about this question. Roger talks about the difference between strategy and strategic planning. They use the same words, but they mean something very different. If you really want to go for it, read his book Playing to Win, and it's such a pragmatic approach to thinking about strategy. And Chris, these questions, it's a framework. It's not the only one, but he offers a framework of, I think, 5 big aspects of that approach to strategy. So Brad, I would start with, you can't really get it through osmosis. I think you have to decide, I want to be better at this, and you have to go find those frameworks Chris talked about, or do a little bit of your homework on it. So that's number one. You might think about sort of Roger Martin and his approach to this. The second idea I would have is learn everything you can about the income statement of your company, not the balance sheet, not some other sort of more arcane aspect of it, but look at the income statement, because that really answers that banker's question. Remember that little story I was telling, how do you make money? Well, the answer to that question is in that income statement. How does your company make money? And the companies can be different, but the structure of an income statement is pretty universal. So really try to master that. Most of you are probably working in a division, so you may not have a full-fledged income statement, but you've got a P&L that rolls up into your company's income statement. So really go to work on that and try to understand that as best you can. The third thing, and this is it's a common piece of advice. I don't know how commonly it's followed. Dial into those quarterly investor calls. If you're a publicly traded company, at least at the moment, you have a responsibility to report out to your investors every quarter. Now, the slides are pretty good. The first 20 or 30 minutes are highly scripted these days, scrubbed by lots and lots of attorneys. And they're usually, frankly, pretty sterile. They're safe. They're accurate, but they're safe. The Q&A is the last 20 or 30 minutes. That's where the action is. And I would encourage you to really dial into that. When you understand what the market is asking, and they're usually pretty good questions, you'll start to understand about what the board of your company is asking, and you'll then get a good sense of what's going on in the C-suite, where maybe some of you want to be one day. Then you can connect those dots between kind of what you're doing in the emergency room and sort of what the corporate group is dealing with. And you can see how that comes together better from a business strategy standpoint, like Chris said, not an HR strategy. And lastly, I think you've got your new best friend, whether you're a ChatGPT or Grok or Perplexity or whatever you might be using. These days, you can assign it a role. You can say, hey, I want to create a persona. You're a business consultant, and I want to have a very intense conversation around the strategy of my company. and I'm going to upload publicly available documents, and I want to go back and forth. And remember, to me, you don't really know it until you can teach it. You can read it, you can think about it, but your ability to actually maybe teach or dialogue with your favorite LLM is a great way for you to muscle build this in the privacy of your own home or car or mobile phone or wherever you access something like this. And Brad and Chris, there probably are resources available on this subject either at CAHRS or Cornell or both. And if either of you have a idea of where people might go or what we might make available, that'd be a great place to end this question on.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And Chris, all great recommendations. So, certainly here at eCornell, our ILR faculty, including Chris and some others, have developed courses that focus on HR and business strategy, specifically for HR professionals. So those of you that are interested in a more kind of formal training might look into those. And then I will put in a plug for CAHRS because most of what we do is available on our website. The great thing about CAHRS is working with 45 plus companies that span multiple industries, geographies. I think we have pretty good line of sight into some trends happening broadly. And so please do visit our website regularly and other events that we're doing for updates on some of those recent trends and issues. So before we close out, maybe we'll just take a question or two. Interesting question, and Chris, maybe I'll direct this at you. Came in from Matt. He's thinking about making the jump from human capital consulting into an HR business partner role, and he's kind of curious about what maybe from his past experiences will translate well, and where might the gaps exist from going from the consulting side into more of the HR business partner role.
So having done a lot of consulting early in my life, I think one of the biggest things I see is often you come up with solutions that you don't have to live with. So moving it from creating solutions, identifying what companies might do to actually then put them in place, live with them, continue to tweak and make them better is probably one step. I think part of it's also the building the different relationships of how you're going to get those things to go from idea to operationalization, whether that's line leaders, centers of excellence. So really think about internally, how do you create the right support network to drive ideas? I think that the human capital consulting often is a good lens to think about how companies can think about the levers of HR. It's now making sure that that's really aligned with the business and then aligned with what else is going on at the same time. So, great starting place, but probably the relationships and then the living with what you made.
Yeah, that follow through piece. So Kevin, maybe one last question I'll direct to you. This comes from Ida. What she's asking about is, sometimes we need within our unit to develop, individualized HR practices, or maybe more what we might think of as more idiosyncratic deals. So we might want to do something special for a high potential talent that we're not doing for others. And there's always trade-offs there, right? In terms of consistency versus and quality versus more customized arrangements. I mean, how should HRBPs think about standardization versus one-off kind of deals that they might be making within their units?
Great. I'm just going to add one more thing to Chris's great answer on Matt's question first. The other thing, I think it's hard to be a consultant, actually. But one of the easier parts about it is often the problem is defined, right, Chris? It's sort of presented to the consulting company or the consultant, say, we think we have this problem, fix it. They may be right, they may be wrong, but at least you have a brief. And back to my hospital example, my emergency room example, the patient comes in and says, my stomach is on fire. You have to diagnose that and you have to treat it as an HRBP versus I need this particular test. And so one of the things I would encourage, Matt, you to think about is the fun and the challenge of the sort of diagnosis and the boundaries being a lot fuzzier and less defined. Now, I think that's what makes it great, but it is different, maybe to your question. And then, I think on this standardization, customization question, honestly, these days I would hold the bar pretty high for when you need to customize. It isn't to suggest you shouldn't, but there are lots of HRBPs that start there. Like, I need to make this different. I want to be more innovative. I want to be more creative. I want to put some points on the board. I want the organization to kind of notice me. My line partners are on me to do this. And so it may be your first move. And I'm just suggesting it really should be your next to last move. I think you ought to see, is there a way we can scale, conform, trim the edges a little bit around standard processes, because they're always going to be easier to scale. And I would just have more of a bias to, can I possibly make this work? There are times when you can't, and that's when you have to customize. My very first job at Pepsi was supporting their R&D center, where they had scientists, not production people and truck drivers and salespeople, but food chemists, carbohydrate chemists, sweetener experts and things like that. A career path for R&D was going to have nothing to do with what the standard issue was for marketing or sales or manufacturing or other parts of Pepsi. So that was a chance for me to innovate and create something new. But again, the bar was pretty high. So proceed with caution, but certainly proceed where you feel like the standard answers aren't going to get you where you need to go. Brad?
Great. All great recommendations. So before we wrap up today, just a few quick reminders. So again, this is a series. This is the second keynote in the series. Our third keynote in the series will be coming up on Thursday, November 13th at noon Eastern Time. So we hope you'll join us for that session as well. In that session, we're going to start going into those key levers that you see in the framework. So specifically in that session, we'll be focusing on the talent and leadership lever, examining what are those essential processes and actions that HRBPs need to engage in to effectively manage both leadership and critical role talent. Also would encourage you to visit the landing page that will be, you'll see in the chat. That's where you can download the framework, an interactive version, and dig into it a bit more. We'll also be posting recordings of these keynotes there so you can view them again later or share them with others who may be interested. And we'll be continuing to build out various collateral, whether it's assessments, playbooks, etc. And those will be posted at that landing page as they become available. So please come back and visit the page regularly for the most recent updates. So thanks again for joining us today, and we hope to see you again in a few weeks. Thank you.